Well, hello and welcome everyone. Our moderators come in the door, so we're all here. The party can start. I'm Jane Henniger. I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Indiana, and I want to thank you all for being here and welcome you on behalf of the ACLU and on behalf of Kelly Jones Sharp, who's our person who makes all this happen every other month for the ACLU. And our first Wednesday program. Before I get started, I just want to point out that our next first Wednesday program will be in June with a little bit of a different time and place. We're going to have a program in partnership with the IMA about art and dissent in the style of Ai Weiwei. And Ai Weiwei's exhibition is opening this weekend at the IMA, so I encourage you to go to see the exhibit and then come hear us in June at 6 p.m. It'll be an evening program to talk about freedom of expression in our society and in others. So as to this first Wednesday, I want to point how rare and awesome it is that one of our first Wednesday programs coincides so perfectly with one of our victories on behalf of our fellow Hoosiers. And a victory the ACLU won, I should say, in conjunction with Sarah's firm, Lewis and Kappes. On Friday, if you didn't see the news, federal judge Sarah Evans Barker ruled the state's immigration law passed in 2011 unconstitutional and ruled in favor of our clients. The more information about the case is in your program, I believe, but I just want to point out that this ruling affirms yet again, and having to be in the role of yet again standing for our constitutional rights is the whole point of the ACLU. But the Judge Barker's ruling affirmed once again that the Constitution applies and protects each and every one of us in Indiana. So. We're very excited that that case and this panel discussion have coincided so beautifully. I want to thank you all for being here and for being open and eager to hear the conversation with our panelists. I want to thank our panelists for taking the time and sharing their thoughts and insights, and to our moderator, Rafael Sanchez. And I want to thank also our partner in today's discussion, the Immigrant Welcome Center, a fellow Rubin Family Fund recipient. Thank you, Larry, who's not able to be here, but always thanks to Larry Rubin. And though, besides being the recipient of the Rubin funds, the Immigrant Welcome Center has the great blessing of being led by the irrepressible Terry Morris Downs. So I want to thank you all for being here, and I'll hand it off to Terry.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the warm welcome. My name is Terry Morris Downs, and I'm very honored to be the Executive Director of the Immigrant Welcome Center. I'm joined today by David Sklar, a member of our Board of Directors with the Jewish Community Relations Council, and Dulce Vega, our Program Director, is also here with us, as well as Patricia Alonso. I don't see Patricia, but I know, oh, there she is back up there, our AmeriCorps member who's helping with some of our programming this year. First of all, I'd like to thank the ACLU of Indiana and Lewis and Kappes for inviting us to co-sponsor this event today. I also want to personally thank the ACLU of Indiana for choosing to focus on immigration as a First Wednesday topic, and to give a special word of gratitude to Ken Falk and the ACLU's legal team, who worked so diligently to uphold the dignity and rights of immigrants in Indiana. Judge Barker's ruling on Friday fits perfectly with our overarching goal of making Indianapolis a welcoming and inclusive community to everyone, and one that respects and values everyone's contributions and wants to see everyone succeed. Believe it or not, we at the Immigrant Welcome Center often ignore the big picture issue of immigration because we are so very focused every single day on helping immigrants and refugees who are already here from more than 38 different countries of origin, making Indianapolis their new home. Through a network of 5 neighborhood branches, and Terry Garcia is here from Southeast Community Services, one of our branch locations, and more than 70 volunteers that we call natural helpers, we connect individually with them, providing a link to the resources and services they need in order to become self-sustaining in the United States. Sometimes it's just a green card issue or naturalization information, but it's also finding ESL classes in Indianapolis, affordable housing, employment information, transportation, links to social services, community resources, or just establishing new social connections in the city. Because the natural bonds of human dignity surpass the geographic, ethnic, or cultural boundaries, we at the Immigrant Welcome Center believe that all residents have the right and responsibility to contribute to and enjoy the vitality of Indianapolis and their own neighborhood. By working together with compassion and emphasizing the value of ethnic diversity, we can show our decency as global citizens and intentionally improve Indianapolis economically, socially, and culturally. As the panel shares their views on immigration today, I urge you to keep in mind the viewpoint of the immigrant and his or her desire to build a new life in a brand new country can really be a catalyst for growth and vitality for our city and our nation. Like Sarah and Albert Rubin, who were immigrants and have been very generous with the Immigrant Welcome Center, with the ACLU, and with WFYI, after whom this room is named. They are the perfect examples of what immigrants can and do in the United States. They give so much more back to the community than they take. So thank you for permitting me to be here today. It's now my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Rafael Sanchez of WRTV Channel 6.
I always tell people that when you come to events and if you happen to be Latino, you get to hug all these beautiful women and give them a kiss. So I'm always grateful to be an MC because it's culturally accepted to do so. So Mrs. Sanchez is not mine because she understands that that's what we do. We hug and kiss beautiful women. We also hug and kiss the male counterpart as well. So we're huggy and kissy kind of folks. We have no spatial issues. I want to thank the ACLU for allowing me to moderate this discussion, and we'll get right to it. You know, as I was thinking about what to say, I remember working in Arizona back in 1998, and I was moving from Arizona to my new TV station in Texas. And as I was in my Mazda Civic gray vehicle, Border Patrol stopped me. And I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me. I'm not Mexican, I'm Dominican. Wait a minute, I'm American. But Border Patrol did stop me, and they wanted to know where I was going, and they asked for my identification and my stuff. I thought, is this for real? And it was really, honestly, working on a border town, which Yuma, Arizona is, I never really realized that these things could happen just because they can. And sometimes they happen because you look like a Sanchez or a Gomez or a Rodriguez. So that was really my first encounter as a reporter who was covering the border, to be stopped by those nice folks in green, and I was very respectful. And I understand that they have a job to do, but I think that this issue has come a long way. You know, I love the state that I live in because I think we've come a long way. We have many challenges before us, and I think these kinds of discussions and the efforts of the Immigrant Welcome Center and all the different organizations that are here in town will make us a better state to live in. And I think we're beginning to see that. I think many of us can say that we recall when we would walk down in the malls in Greenwood or Castleton, and we were the only Latino or the only African American in that mall, and now we walk around going, hey, ¿cómo está? Hey, what's happening? Buenas tardes. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this discussion. Let's get right to it. So in Washington, D.C., we're hearing about this gang of 8, right? Immigration, all of a sudden, people have found that Latinos live south of the border, and they want in some way fix the problem. There's a problem, right? We just realize there's a problem. Will we see any kind of immigration reform this year? Sarah, Moshe?
Yeah, well, I believe so, yes. They're saying the Gang of 8 it's a group of 8 bipartisan senators who have come together to draft a bill, and we were disappointed to learn that they left for recess without having any draft ready for publication, but they are saying that the end of next week, so upon their return, that they will issue a draft. They are finalizing some of the last issues, mostly future flow and border security, things like that. and they'll get something out.
And since you're the lawyer on the, is this an issue of, it's the pathway to citizenship, right, where everyone's getting stuck? Are we going to give amnesty to those people? Is that the sticking point, the pathway? Is there going to be a fine? Is there going to be 5-year waiting period? What is the sticking point to this reform?
It's hard to speculate. They are talking about a pathway to citizenship that is earned. That includes things like background checks, of course, for criminal history, maybe some language requirements potentially. But the sticking point right now, as far as we understand with the Gang of Eight, is the border as it stands. They don't want to encourage future influx of illegal immigration. So it needs to be something that has a physical presence requirement probably, so for the folks who have been here for a period of time already.
Professor McCann, we often think of Latinos as being the immigrant population, but in Indiana, if you go visit the Immigrant Welcome Center, you will see a whole host of countries represented from Africa and Far East Asia. What's happening? The demographics are changing. We're seeing it in Marion County. In some schools are dealing with kids that speak more than 100 languages.
Yeah, I don't know if I know a kid who speaks 100 languages, but I want that kid in my class.
He's going to be the Pope.
The
Pope Francis
yes, very
II.
good. But you're absolutely right that these are interesting times. Indiana, and there are some other states that would fall into this category, South Carolina, North Carolina, Iowa. The story of immigration and migrant settlement over the last 20 years is really states like Indiana being very attractive for newcomers. It's a new destination target area in the sort of immigrant literature out there, and it's really changing a lot of our sort of everyday life. So much for the better. It's really enriching the state, as was mentioned before. One group you didn't mention that is noteworthy. Yes, by and large, we're talking about a substantial and growing Latino population. But we lead the country. Fort Wayne, Indiana, leads the country in Burmese settlement. Sure. Close to 2,000 Burmese refugees, settled in Fort Wayne, and no other city in the country has as many. This is following civil strife in Burma. And along the Thai border. So we're talking, this is a growing age of diversity, and in all kinds of remarkable ways we're seeing enrichment around our state.
And Victoria, as you see the population shift, as people are coming from all different parts of the world, what are you seeing as some of the challenges then on the grassroots level? Because obviously we can talk about this in big concepts, but what are the challenges on Main Street?
Well, I think it'll be a challenge for the people that are racist towards us, because it'll be harder for them to say that it's a Latino problem when it's not. It'll be an immigration in general problem. So it'll be harder for them, but it will be easier in immigration because we'll present a united front.
We often hear about the dreamers, those that were brought by their parents at an early age, and we're still sort of battling that, are we not? That's still a big issue for a lot of young people
of course.
In that age category. How are they doing? How are they coping?
There's a lot of hope, especially this year, that we will be able to become normal, because the biggest problem is that you grow up feeling like you're part of a community, that you're the same as everyone else, and then you reach a point in your education, because it's usually through education that we realize that we're not the same, we're different. So I feel like if change comes, we will feel more united, more normal, more part of a community, and it will be good because we grew up here, we're part of here. We feel like we're American, yet we're not because of a piece of paper.
And Professor, history has shown that at some point the powers get it, or they're forced to get it because the people are here. They're speaking this different language, they're cooking arroz con pollo, rice and beans, and there's nothing you can do about it because now everyone is eating it and it becomes the norm, right? So at some point, the power structure says, all right, we get it. We have to do something and we'll make things right.
Yeah, to follow on a comment Sarah made, she was talking a little bit about the politics of this, and you're talking about the power structure getting it. Elections are, in a democracy, elections are really where the rubber meets the road. And what we're seeing nationwide, and certainly in Indiana as well, a lot of signaling going on from the U.S. public to elected officials. If Mitt Romney had just a teensy bit more of the Latino vote. Okay, he wouldn't even have had to have won the Latino vote, but just if he hadn't thoroughly alienated that constituency, it's imaginable that states like Colorado, Nevada, Florida, might have gone his way. And so what we're seeing, and immigration issues tie into, in general, sort of the way we relate to ethnic constituencies, newer constituencies, and related issues. So what we're seeing here is the 2012 elections was one of these I get it sorts of moments, and Washington now is trying to respond to that. Just this morning, if any of you read when I grind my coffee, I read the Washington Post each morning, and they just released a poll showing some interesting politics that independents, nonpartisans, by substantial, decent majority, 60-40 thereabouts, support citizenship tied into comprehensive immigration policy reform. Democratic identifiers, by a margin of 3-1, support that. Where the stickiness is, though, is among Republican partisans. It's about 2-1 against that. So we're still seeing some tension there, and if anything is going to slow up the progress this year, and I share the optimism that Sarah mentioned, but if anything is going to kind of prove to be sticky, I think the challenge in politics is responding to your sort of targeted constituencies, your grassroots, versus the larger public concerns as articulated in last year's elections.
Sarah, isn't also the bigger problem that the entire system of immigration is just bureaucratic and cumbersome? If you're trying to get a visa, if you're trying to just enter the country, the system as a whole, at the end of the day, is just really messed up. So it doesn't really matter if you're Latino or if you're African or you're Asian or Australian, the system is just cumbersome.
That's right. It's antiquated. The backlogs are unbelievable. I see hundreds of clients who have family petitions that have been pending since the early 90s who still have no relief. So the bureaucracy of it is very frustrating, and it's something that we as attorneys fight on a daily basis.
Is it intentional? I know there's always an attempt to bring the more skilled workers, the HB1 visas, to get the best of the world, but do you believe it's intentional, or do you just think the system is just so messed up that it just doesn't know how to respond to the influx of people wanting to come to the States?
I don't know that it's intentional. I wouldn't go as far as to say that. But I do think that it's outdated. And so what's happened is they created a system in the 80s that just doesn't work for our demographic today, for the population in the country today. And they don't have the number of government employees to handle the number of petitions that have been pending since the 80s. So I think it's more of a bureaucratic kind of bottleneck that's happened. And I wouldn't say that's intentional, but it does need to be fixed.
Before we open the questions to the floor, I just wanted to get your reaction, if at all, to there was a ruling on Friday from Sarah Evans Barker on the immigration bill. There have been rulings around the country on this matter. Do you think we'll see more of the Jan Brewer, governor of Arizona, trying to impose these draconian, my words, wacky rules because she can? Or do you think that the tide has turned, that people are going to be much more thoughtful about trying to impose national security-based immigration policies?
Well, I'm an optimist in this area, and so yes, I think that absolutely we will see a shift. I'm very hopeful as far as it now being a bipartisan effort, which is novel in the world of immigration. It, in the past, has been something the Democratic Party alone has pushed, and so now that we're bringing in Democrats and Republicans, I think there's much more hope in Washington, D.C. And as far as the decisions that are coming down on circuit court levels across the nation, it just shows that this is an issue that people are now realizing can't continue, and the draconian policies that we see coming out of Arizona and even somewhat in our own state aren't being held up. And so I think the more that happens and the more success we have in cases like the ruling that came down on Friday, the more we will see a shift across the country.
And Professor, I'm just kind of surprised. I lived in Arizona, and a lot of people in Arizona look like me, that they would elect a Jan Brewer. Isn't it interesting that while a majority of people there, our last name's Gomez, not everyone, but a lot of folks, that she still gets to win. I mean, isn't that kind of a bizarre situation?
Yeah, on the face of it, yeah, it does look kind of difficult to explain. It's worth noting, though, nationwide, when you look at the Latino adult population, I just looked this up as part of a project, over 40% right now lacks voting rights. Okay, and the reason for that, because they haven't naturalized, right? So it's a rather large number. In principle, of course, I mean, the U.S. Constitution makes it clear that all residents are entitled to representation. That's how we apportion congressional districts and like. So there's no necessary reason that you have to confine representation just to the voting public, say. But in practice, the way it works out, the fact that so many Latinos are sort of at the pre-naturalization stage means that you're going to see this kind of lack of synchronization there with sort of larger public opinion and who actually is going to get elected.
Your thoughts, Victoria? Should there be fear? I mean, should people be afraid? I mean, people on the border are afraid. And there are some legitimate security issues on the border, so we can't dismiss those. But should people be afraid that those people are going to take my job, are going to be, we all often hear this, are going to be a drain on the social system, they're going to take tax services away? I mean, is that just simply ridiculous? I have my own answer, but I'll let you answer.
I think it is a matter of people not being educated on the subject. Okay. There shouldn't be fear, but I feel like people should learn about the subject that they're attacking. So a lot of the people that are afraid of immigration don't realize that a lot of immigrants don't have the means to get social services, which is what they're saying. They don't pay taxes and they get a lot of aids. Well, they do pay taxes, but they don't get the aids. And I think as long as people understand that, the idea that immigrants are the evil or the other, it will erode, and they will see that we're just people and we're other residents that they grew up with, and we are just part of the community and want to help and are willing to put the legwork to become citizens if we're allowed to.
And we work hard.
Of course.
Yeah, we do. I'd like to open up the floor to questions. I think this is the best part, to really exchange ideas. If you'd like just to stand and tell us who you are, just first name, and just if you have a question for the panel. Let's have our discussion as we continue this. Yes, sir. Please stand. And what your name, sir?
You mentioned.
Could you please stand, sir, if you can,
You mentioned just a minute ago about legitimate opposition to immigration.
Yes, sir.
Could the panel talk about legitimate opposition to immigration?
And when you say legitimate, are you saying folks that are just fully against?
Well,
explain.
Yes, for or against. Like, for instance, in this country now we have a lot of people out of work.
Yes, sir.
And I would think immigrants coming into this country are going to be competition for work.
Sure.
So what do we do about that? Ignore it? And there's other, besides immigrants, there's other people coming into this country that are competition for jobs.
Sure. And I would imagine, sir, I won't debate you because that's not my role as a reporter, but I would imagine that in a global economy that we're all competing every day for jobs, and that's why there are Ford and GM plants and Toyota plants, and a lot of people in Greensburg, Indiana currently work for a Japanese employer, and I would imagine that you would not want them to lose their jobs if Japan were to close that plant. So I think we are now a global economy, so there are a lot of Hoosiers that currently work for companies that are out. Allison's is a British company, and so I would imagine that what you're saying is that we are in a global competition, but I will allow my colleagues to answer the question. Are there truly legitimate reasons to be opposed to this immigration policy when there are issues of, we are in an economy where in some states the unemployment rate is beyond 11%. In our own state it's close to 8%. Should we be concerned about an influx of immigrants, or even making the people that are here legal and not putting them on planes and sending them back to their countries of origin?
I think those, if I may, I think those are legitimate concerns that we hear voiced every day. I think it depends who you're asking also, but the more we bring these individuals who are here undocumented right now forward, and the more we do things like DACA, the Deferred Action Program, where they can have work authorization, the more those people are going to pay taxes and put money back into the economy, which will hopefully create additional jobs in the workforce and improve the infrastructure. Those are, I would say, legitimate arguments. I do want to point out a few things about this immigration reform we keep hearing about. Strong employment verification is one of the most essential elements of any reform that's going to come forward. And
And Sarah, just to be clear, that's the whole E-Verify, where employers are required under federal law, supposedly, to make sure that every person, all of us, when we come to a job, have all the proper documentation proving that we are here, either a legal resident or a United States citizen. Is that correct?
That is what E-Verify is, and E-Verify is in place right now, but we see a lot of employers, even large employers, who accept documents that they have no obligation to check. And that just speaks to, I think, the need for more workers, maybe low-skilled workers. The W visa is something that we're hoping is part of reform, and that is for low-skilled workers who can do the jobs that we need done and do them legally. The Republicans are interested in immigration reform right now, I believe, in large part because they say that by 2026 we will have a 20 million worker shortage in the United States. So this is something that we're hoping will actually improve the workforce and improve the economy. I think we're stagnant right now, and there needs to be something done, particularly in that sector, for improvement.
Professor, before you begin the conversation, I just want to make sure that we knock on our Democrat brothers and sisters that this is a political issue. And so the Democrats also want the same votes. They want to carry Colorado and New Mexico, New York, and Florida. So while there may be different tactics, that the Democrats also want the vote, just to be fair.
Yeah, no, excellent point, well taken, that this is, the impression should not be that this is partisan in any way. So keeping the sort of political science hat on, let me just say that I appreciate the concern about, wage depression, employment displacement, things like that. I mean, these are arguments that have been out there for a while, and economists have looked at these dynamics, and in practice they're very tricky to measure, but there's no strong evidence at all that the most recent wave of migration has sort of contributed to the unemployment rate that we're seeing or the reduction in wages. To put it somewhat differently, there are a lot of other factors that economists point to that might be driving those kinds of problems. More sort of anecdotally, let me just say, I just drove in from the northern part of Indiana, and it's very easy to hear if you start talking to people in agriculture. If you want to hear people sing praises of immigrants and immigrant labor and the need for that, and in all kinds of, a lot of poultry production, hogs, a lot of agricultural processing and the like, over the last 20 years, I mean, there's a reason why immigrants are coming to a state like Indiana. There's huge demand for labor, and that labor has lots of multiplier effects as well, which are tricky to measure, but arguably quite positive for sort of general quality of life.
May I say something?
Yeah.
I mean, most immigrants that come to this country work in the very lower level jobs. They're jobs that most people wouldn't take. I work in a restaurant right now, and I know that the managers in the restaurant much rather hire Americans, but they realize that the Americans go through very fast because they're looking for better opportunities. Whereas if they hire immigrant workers, they're going to work hard and they're going to stay, so they don't have to keep retraining people. So there is a need for a population that will work the jobs that most Americans don't dream of. But also, there's always been a fear that the immigrant will come and take jobs away, but every generation we find out that there's a surplus of jobs, and there's always a need for more people to cover those jobs. But there's also the need to consider that we need that population, but we also need their children so they can be educated and grow up and work in the jobs that are needed, because we never know who's going to be the next neuroscientist that's going to discover the way to cure Alzheimer's, or who's going to be the scientist who's going to be able to take us to the moon and maybe even colonize it. But we never know who's going to hold the future. So if we kick out those immigrants, we're hurting ourselves, but we're also hurting our future.
Can I respond?
No, you cannot. Well, not because you can't, but I want to get another question. The folks will remain afterwards. I just want to get as many questions as possible. I'm not trying to cut you off and not allow you to express your First Amendment rights, but I want to get more folks involved. Go ahead. So, well, so that you don't accuse me of not. What is your point?
There's other things that contribute to the unemployment, or the people who are unemployed.
Okay.
There was a program on 60 Minutes Overtime not too long ago.
Sure, but get to your point, though. What is the point? You've heard what they had to say. Obviously.
Okay, I would
get to the
just
point.
like to see
Okay, there we go.
the full coverage of the impact of immigrants.
Sure.
And I'm not saying I do or do not like it. You know, I'm not prejudiced personally, but I do recognize that there are people in this country that do not have jobs.
Sure.
And the one party picks on them because they just call them lazy, they don't want to work.
Sure.
But there's good reasons they don't have jobs.
Sure.
But it's not only immigrants that contribute to that. It's also visas. Visas contribute to that. I know personally of a person who, no, not personally, I read it, a person that was displaced at a job in this country. An immigrant from another country came into this country, this company, and that the person trained the immigrant, and then the immigrant, the visa holder, I should say, then the visa holder took her job
Okay.
at a lot less wages. But I would like to see the numbers
Sure.
put out there and the full impact of what happens to everyone, like education costs and all this, hospitalization costs, healthcare costs. Thank you very much.
And I would also like to see the same numbers of the current people who are living in this country. And I would imagine that also before the colonists arrived, the Native Americans would have liked to have seen that study. But as we know, the world does move on and things do progress. So I think we have to be able to, as good corporate citizens, as good citizens of the world, deal with issues at hand. I mean, one planet, we have to deal with people that are here in a humane and in a good way. So I think that's our challenge every day, is to, as people, in whatever our industry is, to figure out a way in our own world, how do we make sense of this? So I take your point that we need more information. I think we could always use more information about making any decision. There's a lady in the back.
My name's Becky Bollinger.
Hold on, ma'am, if you could
Okay.
take the microphone. Thank you, ma'am.
My name's Becky Bollinger, and I want to just talk about education for a moment.
Yes, ma'am.
My children went to an elementary school in Pike Township that had 28 different countries represented. And I know that at the time when they were having to take I-STEP, if that child had been in the school for more than 2 weeks, they had to take I-STEP,
Sure.
whether or not they were English proficient. Has there been any effort from the Welcome Center, or I mean, they're way beyond that right now, to aid those schools that are being penalized because they do have a larger immigration population, therefore their test scores are lower, and it affects their funding?
Sure, and I should also point out, my wife is a public school teacher, that not only does this cover students that are new to the country with language deficiencies, but also children that are autistic and that have EIPs, which are the special education programs, students that have specialty programs that may have a disability, that they also take the I-STEP. And because public schools are public and funded by tax dollars, that those students who also take the I-STEP, that it could count against the school as well. I think it's an issue that beyond just the language factor, it is a broad issue which affects every public school that has to accept every student who comes to the door, hungry or not, and that does, so I think there has to be an issue, obviously, and I'll let the panelists discuss that, the issue of education. Schools are spending a lot of money. They are battling that issue as children come to the schoolhouse, that they may not have the staff to help that child that speaks the Burmese dialect, or if they come from Bolivia, speaks the Quechuan dialect, not necessarily Spanish. Quechuan is the language of the indigenous people of Bolivia, or may speak that Mayan dialect from Mexico. I don't know. What do schools do? I mean, how do you address that? There's just limited amount of dollars. We don't have all the money in the world to reach every person, do we? Professor? You have money?
I think that's a point well taken. We do not have all the money in the world. Okay, so yes, my impression, and this is outside of my own research area, my impression, and certainly based on observations in communities that have been affected a lot recently by immigration, communities like Frankfurt, Indiana. My impression is that the schools are doing quite a lot of creative, innovative work to respond to these new opportunities, the new demands placed on the staff, and so on. So, for instance, what I've seen just in the last few years in school districts like Frankfurt, where you have whole blocks that went majority Mexican in a few years, they're doing a lot more with reaching out to community groups and getting sort of teachers, aides, and so on who are bicultural and so on. And the educational research, I think, is the claim has been out there for quite some time. It's widely accepted that you do need a period of time where you have bilingual instruction. If the goal is to bring students up to proficiency as quickly as possible, the immediate immersion just is not as preferable to others. So my sense is that, I don't know if we want to call that sort of incremental or muddling through, sort of, trying to cope given the real constraints on resources. Let me just say, 1 minute's worth of something I do know about is with higher education. This is quite a concern in Indiana and nationally, that a lot of second generation, the children of immigrants, or what's sometimes called the 1.5 generation, students, young people who might have been born abroad, but for all practical purposes are reared in the United States. I think higher education, institutions like Purdue, have to do a lot more to reach out. I've had many conversations with immigrants from different ethnic groups who don't feel like, Purdue or IU, it's not really for them. Okay, it's not. I mean, the leading public institutions in the country, and they might think about other educational options post high school. But I think my university and IU, and I can speak for everybody, I think they're getting more and more ambitious in terms of reaching out to Ivy Tech to build bridges into West Lafayette or into Bloomington, and to reaching out even into K through 12 to put that on the map. I really think that's our challenge in higher education, is to say, look at, we're public institutions. Purdue in particular is a land grant institution, and it really needs to be there for all people, including newcomers.
I'm always impressed that my company, RTV6, is owned by Scripps Howard. And if you look at the Scripps Howard spelling bee that will come in June, I'm always very impressed at the number of young people who go through the spelling bee and even win the spelling bee who are from different countries. So I think when we look at our educational system across the country for all its knocks and obviously many more of its achievements, that our schools do a fantastic job of helping to assimilate, if that's the word we want to use, our global communities, and many of those young people find pathways to success. And you will see that the country's best spellers sometimes are not last name Smith anymore. And that's a good thing, because Smith is still at the table, but he's also joined by Mr. Hong and Miss Lee and everybody else under the sun. So that's a really good thing. Yes, sir. Microphone? There you go.
My last name is Smith.
And you know what? It's a good name to have, sir. Yes, indeed.
I just have a general question about the immigration process, which I know nothing about. My last name is Smith. Say I live in Ghana and I want to come to this country. What do I do? How does it work?
Okay, Sarah, you will have 15 seconds. And I'm gonna, because I do not want to hear W1 or HB1 or any of those documents. What is the quickest way from Ghana to the United States?
None.
Okay.
There really is no good way. You would have to have a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident relative who could petition you, and then you would be facing potentially years of backlog, as I was mentioning before. It could be an employment-based non-immigrant visa, but those are typically temporary. It could be a visa lottery program, which they literally have a certain number and they draw it out of a hat, if for lack of a better visual. But really there is no good way or quick way or guaranteed way to get to the United States from somewhere like Ghana.
Any other questions from this side of the room? Mike over here. Oprah over here. Dr. Phil, sorry. It's not fair being gender sensitive.
Hello, my name is Patty, and I'm wondering if one of you could please tell the audience what can we do if we're supporting this pathway to citizenship? Who should we be calling, and what should we be doing here in our community?
She would like a call to action. Victoria?
Well, of course, you should get in contact with your representative and senator, not just state level, but in the federal level. It always surprises me to find out that they value greatly the input from their constituents, and most of them vote according to what they hear from their constituents. So obviously, hate will get a lot of replies. So they listen to a lot of people saying, don't do this, don't do this. But when it matters, we need to go up and say, we are behind you if you vote for this. So we need to let them know, we need to give them the green light saying, we want this to happen. Ignore the haters, listen to us, because we're out here and we want to be represented also.
And isn't it funny that usually in any situation, it's that 1% that makes it the worst for the 99%. So I know that as a member of the media, we often focus on the wacky people when they're 99% of the good people. And we live in a good state, in a good community with people that really want to do good things, but sometimes it's those that make the most noise that get the most that get the most attention.
And it takes 5 minutes. You just need to go Google, hey, I live in this area, who's my representative? And it takes 5 seconds to send them an email or quick phone call saying, hey, I support this, my name is this, I live here, thank you.
Very good. So you had a question in the back.
Sarah, could you talk, I'm sorry, David Sklar with the Jewish Community Relations Council. Sarah, could you talk briefly about the implications of the policy discussion going on now between sort of the employment and education-based reform versus family immigration? There was an exchange, I think, last week or the week before between Senator Chambliss and an activist, and the contention of that exchange was if it's strictly education and workforce system that's put in place, it will be to the detriment of maybe women, especially in developing countries that don't have access to the education and work training that men do.
Sarah, another 30-second answer. Look at that. You're just on the roll today.
I want you to clarify your question to me, if you don't mind. The implications of...
So I guess, yeah, what are the policy implications of a reform that's put in place that's strictly employment-based and one that is maybe a good mix of work and family? I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is.
Okay, based. Yeah,
family-based, thank you.
Okay. Well, I think comprehensive is the key word there. What most people are talking about in Washington, D.C. right now is comprehensive reform. And that includes family-based petitioners or family-based paths to citizenship, and then also employment-based legalization. I think, like you said, if it's strictly employment-based, you've knocked out maybe some gender, the females, a lot of younger people who are here. I think people who are undereducated or haven't completed their education. And those people too, I mean, as Victoria has said, are also valuable and can also contribute in so many ways. So the key is comprehensive for those of us who are fighting for reform. I think it needs to encompass personally, it needs to encompass both sectors. It's just for some people, and depending on the audience, it's more palatable to talk about employment-based reform or opening up more visas to those who are in the workforce or to whom have higher education. That's easier to understand for a lot of folks, but we need to talk about the uncomfortable issues as well.
And does it, just a really quick follow-up, does it look like the Gang of Eight's proposal is going to be a decent mix, or is it going to focus more on the employment-based?
I think it's heavily employment-based, but I do think that it will, I'm hopeful and believe that it will address comprehensive reform.
One more question. I think it'll be the last question of our discussion.
I'll be very quick. My name is Patricia Castañeda. And for the gentleman that was worried about labor, labor is represented from the AFL-CIO. And just so you know, recently, historically, the ACLU and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce have come together on immigration. So that speaks volumes. For those of us who are concerned about labor, I think that giving that toward the organization that represents us is a good idea. My questions have to do with, you mentioned about pathway requirements that are sort of the sticky points as far as background checks and language. Haven't those always been part of the process? In my experience, they have been. Second question, real quick, is on refugees. I know that there are a lot of refugees that are coming that are immigrants. We're not talking just about undocumented, I believe. There seems to be, to me at least, that there are organizations that bring refugees to our communities. And I'd like to know more about what other support services are there for refugees, because in my encounters with refugees, sometimes I feel like they get here, they get a few dollars and a bus pass, and that's it, and an apartment. And I know the Immigrant Welcome Center is there for them, but I also want to know what kind of support there's been giving to organizations like the Immigrant Welcome Center to be able to support these groups. And on the question of intentional, I think that we were talking about earlier about intentional legislation to, as has been said before in the immigration conversation, to drive people back to self-deport. And we have seen that. I think that we need to speak about that, the fact that there is intentional legislation that is being presented in our states to drive out people from our states. And do we see that is going to continue? Do we see, from your perspective, that that is not going to happen? And what are the things that we should be looking for so that when we see intentional legislation to drive people out and to exclude, what is it that we should be doing? Thank you.
So there were 4 questions in there, so I'm going to just sort of do what the media does best, put them in 10 seconds, and just avoid a lot of the other stuff. But she wanted to know basically on the issue, can I take your last question, which is really the issue of intent? And when we talked about, when you began the discussion about Republicans versus Democrat, the reason I was really concerned about where we were going with the discussion is that under the Obama administration, who happens to be a Democrat, we have seen more people sent back to their home countries. Now, granted, a lot of the folks being sent back are folks that have felonies and they're criminals, and so we want them to go back. We don't want them in our own communities. But nonetheless, that's part of the number. So what is the record here? I mean, is there really a way to achieve this without causing harm to our communities? The issue of, and to the gentleman's point, look, I don't want someone coming to my country taking my job. Point well taken. Can we achieve that? Can we open up work visas? Can we open up the country and protect jobs, social services, and have have both worlds? Have the immigrants stay and not hurt the rest of the country, if that is your fear.
Can I make just a quick comment?
You can make whatever you want, because this is the last round.
I feel like, in my own experience, I feel like the very first step is we need a reform. We need to, for us to be able to protect American jobs and maybe even control immigration in the future, we need to keep in mind that there's a lot of immigrants here already. And they want to stay. We want to be part of the community. We want to help the community. So the first step would be to have a reform, and then to change the immigration system so that it can be more comprehensive, because it is not feasible to think that we can completely eradicate immigration. It has been going on since the beginning of time, and it will continue no matter what laws we put, or even if we build a wall between Mexico and the United States. So the first step is that, and later on we can deal with the problems of future immigration.
Professor McCann, last words?
Yes. And we're circling back to the initial comments, and I think that's a terrific way to end. You're saying, is there a way to do it? Well, there are a lot of tricky fault lines here in all of this, a lot of things to consider, but it all has to be benchmarked against the status quo now, okay? And what
But
we
it's going to
see-
be messy, right? This is not going to...
It's extremely messy. I mean, our political discourse is corrosive, and that has, I think, lots of negative after effects. Even talking about self-deportation and the like, running people out of town. I mean, that's not a high-quality level of discourse. In terms of the nuts and bolts, and Sarah could speak most specifically about this, but given that we have a patchwork system, we sort of have this policy vacuum, and it's a real hodgepodge. From a quality of life standpoint, from an economic investment standpoint, that creates a lot of instability, unpredictability. You don't know where your workforce is going to be. And so people making long-term decisions, I think, are at a loss in that system. So I'm very open. I share the optimism about comprehensive policy reform. And I just think there are so many gaps to fill that I certainly hope that we'll all sort of jump forward on it.
Sarah?
Well, I don't feel your questions were answered yet. So I would say, or thoroughly, I would say that some of the requirements we talked about have been historically part of a path to citizenship, but in a very, like the professor commented, piecemeal way. So, and not always at the start, not always at the front end. So I think the term I keep hearing that applies now is tough but fair. And I think that if we are going to achieve immigration reform in a comprehensive way, and this is sort of answering your question, I think the time is now. We've never been closer. So is it feasible? Absolutely. I think that there's always going to be some sector of the population that won't be entirely on board, but I think this is the closest we've come as a nation to bringing forth a policy that may be, to use the word palatable again, palatable to most American citizens.
We know that this discussion could go on for hours, and I don't think Patricia's question was fully answered, and I know she had questions about refugees and how to connect that gap, and hopefully Terry Morris Downs can, if you have time, she can share that, how to connect people. We definitely want to thank the ACLU for allowing us to have the discussion. We try to squeeze in as much as possible, and unfortunately, 50 minutes is never really enough to discuss a complicated matter such as immigration. We at least have to feel very good that we live in a country where people want to come. And now the question is, as people, as the citizens of this state and of this country, is how do we get it done in a way that is humane and that is welcoming and that is in the best interest of our country. So we want to thank you for coming out today. We hope that you will join the ACLU in future bag lunches? Am I getting that? Brown bag. First Wednesdays. All right. I don't have a teleprompter, so the problem with television people, we're not the smartest in the bunch unless there's words in front of us. But I do want to thank you, the ACLU, and all the partners who came together to discuss this. I hope you will join these conversations as we continue to have them in the weeks and months to come. So Kelly, I'll turn it back to you and for further instructions.
Thank you, Rafael, so much. And thank you all for being here. Becky Bollinger is here from the Indiana Historical Society, and she has one more thing to offer today.
I just wanted to make you all aware
Give her a mic.
of a wonderful project that we did. Indianapolis, the City of Immigrants. This was brought to us as a very grassroots project from the former head of the Mexican consulate, who said that the Hispanic community doesn't know how to fit into the immigration history of Indianapolis. It snowballed from there, and we made 60,000 copies and are giving it away free to every 11th grader in central Indiana. There's free curriculum for the teachers. It has expanded, and now we have 8th grade teachers and 4th grade teachers and immigration groups that are asking for it. There's a wonderful write-up of the Immigrant Welcome Center in here. So I did bring copies for the speakers. If you'd like information, we have it. I brought some extra copies as well. But it's a wonderful, wonderful project to encourage people to realize that this entire city is made up of immigrants. We've come at different times, but it's a wonderful grassroots project.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you for doing that. I want to remind everybody that our next program at the Indianapolis Museum of Art is in a special place and time. It is discussing art as dissent. The Indianapolis Museum of Art is having an Ai Weiwei exhibition, and they are allowing us to have our conversation there on June 5th. So I hope you all will join us there. If you like the work that you see us doing, please grab some materials on your way out and consider joining and donating to the ACLU. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for being here.